Welcome everybody. Today is the 22nd of April. It's very hard to keep track of the days and the dates and the months, but I believe it's Earth Day today, and we're certainly celebrating the fact that we're all, I hope, healthy and well. Our best wishes to those that are not as healthy and well on account of the difficulties encountered by COVID. But we hope that our talk today is part of a series of making the world a better place. This is the third masterclass series that we have run, and this is an international neurodiversity working group between UCD, NUI, ADHD Ireland, and the Neurodiversity Hub in Australia. And we are really looking forward to extending our knowledge and having conversations about both the concept of neurodiversity, the neurodiversity movement, and indeed neurodevelopment in general. So I'm delighted this morning to be introducing a very, very important person in this whole arena, and that is Judy Singer. And Judy is a sociologist and an author. She herself is noted for coinage of this word neurodiversity as part of her thesis, which was published in the University of Technology in Sydney in 1998. And Judy is coming from Sydney to us tonight. So thank you very much for that, Judy. Her research, which we can talk a little bit about, was based on her experience in the middle of 3 generations of women on the autistic spectrum. And also her research was based on membership of early online autistic e-groups and the discussion and the partition among that group. Judy, in 2003, you founded the STEAM, which is a Sydney-wide social club for teenagers and young adults on the spectrum. And for several years, you were secretary of the Inner West Autism and Asperger's Parent Support Group. So, Judy, we're delighted that you've taken time to join us from Sydney tonight, your time, a lovely morning time for us in Ireland. And thank you so much for doing that. We really are honoured to have you as part of this series.
Well, thank you for having me. And as we had such a great preliminary conversation yesterday, I'm a little bit less nervous than I would normally be. So I'm really looking forward to what you're going to pose, what questions you're going to pose here.
Lovely. Indeed, we did. We had a lovely conversation yesterday. And I continue myself on this journey of, I suppose, challenging the training I'd received, my kind of medical model that I almost routinely apply to things without, tremendous amount of additional thought. And over the last couple of months in preparation and in thinking about neurodiversity more general, it has been very, very interesting. Can I start off maybe, Judy, by asking, what does neurodiversity mean to you?
Okay, well, my idea for neurodiversity was actually twofold. It was a part of my original thesis, which was an exploration of many. It was actually the first thesis that had ever been written, I think, about the rise of this whole new kind of social movement that was based on neurological diversity, which is what I subtitled my thesis, a personal exploration of a new social movement based on the rise of a new social movement based on neurodiversity. And it was just a very small part of my thesis. I was very much interested initially in why this phenomenon had suddenly begun at this stage of history. And one of the ideas I had in it was that I realized that although I was associated with the autistic self-advocacy movement, that a lot of other groups like the ADHDs, people with all the, what I call the DIS sisters, lexia, praxia, calculia, who were also starting to show interest. And I thought we really need an umbrella movement for our common aims, which was for recognition, civil rights and appropriate services. And so I thought we needed a name for this umbrella movement, which didn't mean that people would lose their particular label diagnoses that they associated with, that we had common cause, and that was
Good morning,
that was
Councillor. How are you? How are you?
of the neurodiversity movement. Oh, you've disappeared. Okay, so sorry, Fiona.
Not at all.
I
So
wanted to say that I wanted to just finish that was my aim was always political, to name a new movement, and also to add a new category to intersectionality, which at that time was not known very well as intersectionality, but we were always talking in sociology about ethnicity and the intersections of ethnicity, race, disability, gender, and class. So twofold.
yes, I might come back to the intersectionality in a moment, Judy, but can you paint a picture for us of what it was like around that time, that led to this movement? What was it like for individuals with on the autistic spectrum? Or you were also referencing that there were similar sense of distress or discontent among other groups.
Well, I think it was based on one of the women's movement really opened it up for everybody, I think, and then the gay movement, these various liberation movements, and for us, well, we were excluded, oppressed, not understood, and I mean, I've got many examples from my own life and from my mother's life and also my daughter's life. And it was a very exciting time because the internet really opened the gates of communication for us. And I remember one of the things I said in my thesis was that I thought the internet was the prosthetic device invented by autistics for autistics, which turned them from isolated individuals to social beings capable of forming a movement. And there was an autistic self-advocacy movement that was very active in the United States. And they used to have Aut treats, and I learnt from them. And then this was in the mid to late 90s. I joined many online groups, and we shared all our exciting discoveries of how much we all had in common. The support group phenomenon. That's where it began.
Had there been a kind of a climate of parent support groups at that time? Were they quite a large part of the clinical and the support services? Were they something that the services provided, or actually was it more that the parents got together themselves and created these supports, and from that really then you have the movement and the advocacy?
Well, here in Australia, I mean, we were just so ahead of our times because we had those of us who had the internet open to us. The medical profession knew absolutely nothing about it, and we quickly learned not to go there and say, "Oh, look, I've discovered that my whole family has Asperger's syndrome." Oh, you're neurotic. That was the usual. No, you're fine. Your daughter's fine. Yes, she sits in the back of the classroom and never speaks, but just reads. Well, you should be, that's not, you should be happy. So we were totally dismissed. And I do think that what is known by the medical profession now was developed, well, first of all, obviously Dr. Lorna Wing and well, we've got to talk about Asperger, I suppose. And so they did pioneer it, but people like Tony Atwood, who was a psychologist, really developed it. But I think we really, all our close discussions actually developed further. So in a way, it was a partnership in some ways, whether acknowledged or not by the medical profession. But these groups, online groups, actually pioneered it, and that's one of the reasons why I said I thought that we needed a new paradigm for disability studies, which I was studying at the time, and which totally inspired me. But we had different needs.
Yes, and in fact, Lorna Wing herself was a parent of a girl, her daughter, was on the autistic spectrum. And so in a way, it goes back really to the power of parents and the importance of, making sure that that's very much maintained as part of anything that we do moving forward.
Oh, I
Judy.
should have said that I also was a member of a parent support groups, both online, both in Australia and overseas, or mostly in Australia actually. And I also started a parent support group, or rather a support group of people like myself who were raised by an autistic parent, and we also discussed our commonalities there. And well, it was difficult in the early days when we knew more about it than the psychologists and the doctors, but we did have Dr. Tony Atwood, who gave it legitimacy, or what we're beginning to give the whole movement legitimacy.
And Judy, although in your particular case, it kind of emerged from the autistic spectrum and both your individual experiences as a mother and as a daughter of a mother with autism, you were saying that there were other groups at the time that were also recognizing the need for both more advocacy, more involvement in the planning of clinical service, the delivery of services much more broadly, educational, occupational. Is it therefore, because maybe when you read a little bit about this, and certainly initially in my journey in reading it, I was in some ways, feeling that the neurodiversity movement was very much concerning individuals with AS, but it's obviously much broader than that. How, did that kind of broader group come together, or, is there a broader group that is uniting, all of the aspects? I mean, basically, as you say, we're all neurodiverse. Some of us have individual similarities and differences that might allow us to be part of one particular group. But how is that broader concept and that unity between different interested stakeholders happening?
Well, when I said that we wanted a disability movement, it's kind of more like a discourse. It's about the movement is everyone who's talking about it and everybody who these well-known groups, but there are other sorts of other minor, or not when I say minor, I mean minor in numbers, groups that express interest. And basically, again, it's the internet which is making this possible, that anyone can join in the discussion and anyone can set up a group and anyone can claim expertise, rightly or wrongly. There's no leader, there's no oversight whatsoever. I think that's going to have to come because it's such a growth industry and a lot of people are getting into it. So yeah, there's no scheme behind it. If you're talking about neurodiversity in the public, you are the movement or you are the part of the discourse. It's
Do you think that certain countries are ahead with the concept and with the understanding and with the willingness to have those conversations?
Well, from my perspective, the UK is ahead, and I've been hearing about neurodiversity conferences and people talking about it from psychiatrists, friends of mine who've been over there for 10, 15 years, saying it was mentioned. Australia is definitely catching up, but interestingly, I'm much better known in the UK than I am over here still. We have a bit of what's known as the great Australian cultural cringe. We've still got a sort of colonised mentality, and we still have to become celebrities overseas before we get recognised in our own country, which is very sad. And one of the reasons, I mean, after I did my thesis in 1998, I went and knocked on doors and said, look, this is so exciting and this is going to be, I predicted we were going to enter an age where autism was that it was almost going to be an age of autism. And of course, who was I, and so no one took any notice. I got discouraged and depressed and went and did other things. until I was rediscovered by a few American writers, Steve Silverman in particular. And that was like maybe 5, 6 years ago. And Australia is now, this year, there's been a lot more happening, like really exciting things happening, I think. Particularly in the area of early childhood education, which actually you might be really interested in. The conference just was so brilliant, and people, I don't think I'm giving away any secrets, were so frustrated with the system that we have here. And they've just got such brilliant plans going forward. So I'm actually going to send you something about that, and you can distribute it to people who are interested.
Mm. In terms, Judy, of what the neurodiversity movement can bring, and the understanding that individuals who are neurodiverse are just different, and the whole idea that it doesn't mean impaired, it doesn't mean disabled, it certainly doesn't mean handicapped in that old language that was used around individuals that were different or perceived to have, whether it was ADHD or autism. So in that knowledge about how individuals might think differently or act differently, and part of the impairments or the limits on their ability to engage, to be fulfilled, are due to society not being sufficiently adaptive, or schools not being sufficiently adaptive to allow different styles of learning. I'm thinking very much my mother was a teacher, and we often talk about how, back then, the poor children, not that my mother was in that era, but my mother's experience was you were hit if you were out of your seat or if you weren't doing the work. So it was a very rigid kind of structured. On the one hand, that might have suited some, let's say, ADHD children well, because the fear of God was in them in the front seat. But of course, we know that doesn't encourage any kind of learning at all. But she mentioned to me that if you were left-handed, that was seen as, certainly it was a difference, but it was also stigmatized in that you're not meant to be left-handed. And so actually you would be, slapped, or your hand might even be put behind your back in order to encourage you to write with your right hand. It makes no difference, as we know now, and nobody would know who beside you is right or left-handed. But that whole concept about how education, whether it's school or university, teaches in a certain way that doesn't allow individuals who think and learn visually, movement-wise, auditorily, to progress. How do you think, or how would you like to see developments in those areas, with this idea of that we are all different and can excel and meet, be fulfilled if allowed to be so?
Well, I hope that all that is changing. And again, I think it's discourse that changes it. The more we talk about it, the more people share their stories, the more people are moved by the stories, the more people in power are moved by the stories and the narratives that we tell, then that is the way that change is going to come. And then, of course, every movement has got its extremists who hate it, and those who really push the limits of what they can and have massive ambit claims. But all that comes out in the wash, and I think society is changing. I mean, I just turned 70, and the experience I had of schooling was overwhelmingly punitive, and that is one of the. And for me, it was, well, I personally, I mean, I identify as having some autistic traits. I'm brainy, that was what I was called then. And so, I was good at schoolwork. So the teachers didn't torture me in the classroom, but they tortured me in the playground. So everyone got tortured one way or the other. Almost nobody escaped. And I notice now that they're still, from what I hear with the early childhood people, they're going to, do great things. But the ambit claim it's going to take a long time as well to really change the mind of the government. Our governments are very wedded to punitive and it's probably the area that I'm most interested in, and that is that we still have these really punitive attitudes to social control, to making people conform, particularly within the welfare system, which, by the way, I'm also a part of. For me, disability in 3 generations of women, and my poor father, who was neurotypical, trying to figure it out without any help, who probably died young because of it, of the stresses he was under to look after us all. It was a poverty trap, and that is my particular issue that I'm interested in. And, you know, my idea with neurodiversity was not, a lot of people there's a lot of talk about neurodiversity in the workplace, to make the workplace more productive and more efficient. That was not my aim. My aim was to make the workplace more humane, to find more roles for people, to stop the punitive welfare system. I don't know, I'm pretty sure it's pretty bad everywhere, but it's absolutely horrendous under a right-wing government at the moment. Yeah, that's more my interest. I don't know what's happening in education now. Not really. I know that for my daughter, who's now 30, I thought, the education system was pretty good for us parents before all this was known. I mean, we had to give up our careers because we spent half our time running backwards and forwards to the school, explaining things, fighting fires, setting up support groups, and all the rest of it. Well, now there's a lot of helping professions and a lot more understanding. But in my daughter's time, I knew that, while inside, but for me as a dyspraxic who went through so much humiliation in every way and was practically ready to commit suicide in primary school, I noticed they're still doing that thing about, throwing kids out into the playground, making them run races when, someone like my daughter wouldn't even know to run in a straight line or would just head off somewhere else, and getting that hideous, cruel thing that teachers do, that where they get children to pick their own teams, and then the autistic and dyspraxic and all the rest of them end up, and that sort of thing really disempowers you for life, and it certainly disempowered me. I'm still fighting those kind of feelings of not good enough and all that.
You're tapping in some ways, Judy, into, and even just sticking with, school, like education, primary, secondary school, both the importance of, education so that the young person is able to learn and develop, but also the whole social aspect and, what's considered socially appropriate or how people are encouraged to fit in. And, it's no different in any of the minority positions where, children try to fit in because they think they're going to get on better if they do. But, there is that argument that they're not allowed, they have to mask their own identity to do so. And what does that say about the validation of who they are? In terms of how to get it right for most people, is the one kind of approach going to be, able to do that? If you have inclusion, are you going to be able to have an educational system that will be sufficiently flexible to allow each individual child optimize their learning by time out, by physical breaks, by a lot of hands-on work, or a lot of, computer-based rote learning? You know, you can imagine for some people that'll work, but if you have so many accommodations within a classroom, is it going to be possible for the teacher to get through what's becoming an increasingly busy curriculum?
Mm-hmm.
And might there be a time where there needs to be a bit of both, that, you trial something, but some individuals might say, actually, I'd like to opt out of this and, like to have a school that's very much focused on my visual type of learning, or I'd like to stay home and have my learning very much, at my own pace based on my areas of interest and skill set.
Mm. You mean like educational balkanization, as we used to call it? Splitting
Yeah.
into, I don't know. Like I said, education is not my area really, and I am aware that that's potentially a problem. Even like people in the social model of disability, who were my heroes, particularly a man called Leonard Davis, who wrote the book Enforcing Normalcy that I quote, that I
Mm.
based a lot of my work on. He's talking about how many, what did he call? Oh, just the words escape me now. How many protected classes can we have? People who are protected by various, um, I
Because I
guess
guess what
you know
happens
what's
when,
going to happen. The squeaky wheels will get oiled, and that's where you need activism and parent activism,
yeah,
and
yeah,
whether
because I'm hoping, Judy, and even though there's still a huge amount to do, um, that by the time you get to your occupation, if you have been allowed the opportunity, to learn and develop, because you get to choose your occupation, in some ways you are kind of, directing yourself into the area that's going to best fit you. And so it's going to be easier to have a lot more flexible, working environments that will allow people to work to their best. But of course, how do you think the working environments are at the moment? Do you think, since you developed and started this movement, do you think progress is consistently being made in the work environment?
well, my role is to put out the idea that it should be and to find out what is happening. But of course, I retired quite a few years ago, and whether people have the opportunity to select their education and their work. Well, intersectionality is all about class, and I don't know what the situation is in the UK, but how do people in the regions or people from low income backgrounds or unemployed backgrounds, how are they going to choose what they want? What percent? I mean, that to me is the kind of research that academics need to do, and particularly to research um, the intersections. How do people? I actually have a list here that I wrote of all the kinds of projects, research projects that I'd like to see happen, and I'll just read them. All my ideas for research are about the underclasses, um, particularly in terms of what I was saying um, about the importance for me of the punitive system that we have and turning it around. I've got, in terms of neurodiversity, who are the long term unemployed really? Are they mostly neurodivergent people? Who are the rough sleepers who've been totally dropped out of society? There's so many neurodiversity in the workplace enterprises, and I've looked at a lot of their the big multinational companies and their very glossy brochures and their successes placing people. And what I see is male computer programmers, mostly, maybe one or two females. What are they doing for dyslexics or dyspraxics? Or to me, it seems like they're actually picking the eyes. It's not to me what I wanted it to be at all, and particularly about gender. Like who are all the people who are volunteering? My daughter spent years volunteering, 2 days a week. There was a job there, but they feel they can exploit unemployed people. And carers, we're always volunteering,
Mm-hmm.
because we have to be there to advocate for our children. Um, who are prisoners? Those I know that people are working on prisoners. I know Genius Within and Nancy Doyle does a lot of work with prisoners, and I found that really interesting, particularly the statistics, of how many people in prison have ADHD or um, dyslexia, particularly. So they're the things I'm really interested in.
But when you look at the social determinants of health, Judy, you know, they have been known for many, many years. And obviously, you know, it's a vicious circle, really, because it's like you can never get out of it. You know, your physical health is much more unequal. Your mental health is much more unequal. But what you're highlighting is an additional vulnerability that might have been a little bit silent or hidden, is that those with neurodiversity, irrespective of where they started in that level, end up going into that unequal opportunity, you know, pit, really. And the worry is that you know, will continue to cycle, in that their opportunity to get out of it, you know, to get the job, to have the finances, to access care, will continue to be hampered. How, because we haven't made too much progress with, I mean, it's a huge public health concern and public health policy. And I know in Ireland, we have had reports, combat poverty, and you know, there's a lot spoken about, you know, from the Public Health Institute about the need to tackle those, and COVID is exposing that even more. But how do we get the people with the money and the people who are making the policies and who can roll this out so that there's a real focus on it? It's not just lip service.
I know. Well, I sorry, I couldn't help laughing. My first thought was get out the pitchforks and get out there. But sort of that. What am I going to say? Don't vote for Tories for a start. You know, try and change the government, because they are the ones that are locked into the class system, the punitive system, the dealing with excess populations who can't get jobs, who can be shipped off to prison or mental institutions, or become homeless and can just, you know, forget about them. I don't know. My motivation is always political in that sense. Other than that, there's you know, discourse again. I guess there's a tipping point. Well, I hope there is, in which so many people are saying we've had enough of this, and we need to get people to pay their taxes. That's a huge problem in Australia, particularly. Like, you know, so many multinational corporations come here and send the profits back home, and our government does nothing. Yeah.
I guess
no other real solution.
I guess we all see our.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Judy.
No, it's just interesting that I was talking to someone, you know, this information keeps coming from, you know, unexpected sources. A friend of mine was bragging about her very prominent friends in the UK who have an autistic child, and he's doing brilliantly. And, you know, I've heard of this many times, that very wealthy, apparently, you know, their kids are, you know, they've got the connections, they've got the teachers, they've got everything. They're actually transforming. I know friends of mine they're not wealthy, but they are highly educated, and teachers and all sorts of things. And they're, despite a very severely disabled beginning, their children are all doing really, really well. So that's another interesting thing too. How unchangeable is autism, really, if you have the resources to change it, or to not so much to change it, heaven forbid, because that's, you know, because they do have special skills, but how well can it be channeled so that the social, you know, they do what they're good at, but the social skills follow or are not as necessary?
And that success story, Judy, whilst on the one hand, you know, in terms of a child who is not allowed to become more and more impaired by a difficulty, you know, that this isn't kind of been resolved. You know, sadly, the sad flip side of that is that, you know, that family were lucky because they were able to access those services, or even they were able to notice them because their lives weren't so disrupted by other social determinants like money is tight this week, or I don't have outdoor space, or I'm going, I'm finding parenting very difficult, or, my husband's unemployed, or I'm a single parent. So all of those issues,
Nanny,
again,
governesses, helpers, teachers who come to your home that you can, I mean, yes, you can throw resources.
yeah. So the neurodiversity movement, is very much tapping on the whole aspect of, the importance of social determinants and reducing inequalities. But I guess what it's also bringing, which might have been, a little bit less talked about, is perhaps a tolerance and a recognition that we're not all typically behaving in a certain way or typically learning in a certain way, and that, institutions need not only to cater for that difference, but actually, as in some places, celebrate it. Is there a risk by celebrating it, you're almost at risk to create another inequality, that those with certain neurodiversities that allow themselves to, be the IT whizzes and work in Silicon Valley or Eindhoven, where there's much higher rates of autism? Is there a risk that that's going to further create a schism?
Well, I think I was talking about this in another conference, and I was talking about, okay, so say that you now put, what I'm talking about is an economy that at the moment is shrinking, and there are fewer and fewer jobs, okay? So what happens when you put an autistic person and displace a neuro person in an IT job, in a situation of shrinking opportunities? And to me, that's, I call that playing musical deck chairs on the Titanic, because, well, for obvious reasons. I don't know if you heard that, but the ship's sinking and the chairs kept being pulled away. So that's the other pillar of what I'm interested in, is this sort of worshipping of the workplace. I know that there's a lot of evidence that people are happier when they're in paid work, but I would suggest that people are happier when they're doing something useful in community. And I think we've got to stop worshipping paid work, because there's going to be less and less of it. There has always been less and less of it. And instead of doing that, we need what's the word? Safety net. And what I mean by safety net is there's starting to be a big push for a universal basic income that's a livable income that you don't have to fight for and go through hoops for. Universal basic services. There's so many arguments for it. I know there are arguments against it. And I went through at the Australian Sociological Association had practically a whole day devoted to it on their conference. There are arguments against it, but they're not convincing, in my opinion. The only convincing argument is from the far left, to say, well, if you give everyone a basic income, they won't fight against capitalism, in summary. So, yeah, I think that is one of the solutions. Stop worshipifying work and workplaces. Start decentralizing. There's evidence that if we move away from coal-based electricity to wind farms and solar energy, that they have to be locally managed, and that will actually cause society to start decentralizing. Okay, this is futuristic, but things are changing, and they're going to have to change one way or the other. So that is my answer to your question, which I've forgotten what it was. I'm sorry. I hope it's a satisfactory.
It's kind of followed logically. So wherever it started, it's good. But I think you are right in terms of, we're aware of the huge number of carers in our society, and you also mentioned volunteerism, and really, there is that need to value and respect, and to reward it at a monetary level for those that actually need to have a living, as you say. And one wonders, with unemployment benefit, because we all know to get money to survive is necessary. But if you're getting it from unemployment benefit as opposed to getting it from contributing to society, you feel so much better. Individuals have a value if they're contributing. And, the benefit of that on your mental health can't be measured.
Well,
Judy, I
perhaps,
wonder, and
I was just saying,
yeah,
yes, obviously I've thought of that. Universal basic wage, but a top up for volunteering. Like, let's pay people. We've
yeah.
got this thing that we can't afford our human beings. I mean, that's ridiculous. We're very wealthy. It's just that the wealth is not distributed equitably. So they're all ideals that we've got to push
Um,
for. They'll never be fully realised, but
yes,
that's
I
oh,
realize. Mm. I realized, Judy, at the start of this conversation, I completely forgot to introduce myself. So the audience is wondering, who on earth is that woman? But I'm Fiona McNicholas. I'm a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist. And as I say, I was trained very much in the medical model of, an individual comes to see me because they have recognized a distress in themselves or in their child. And our job and in my training was to try and see into which diagnostic category it belonged, which obviously the idea would be it would give me advice and information and ideas about how it might develop and what treatments or supports might be helpful. Would you like to say a little bit about the social model versus the medical model, just kind of at a discussionary level?
okay. Well, so I did my thesis in the within the disability studies, which was the social model versus the medical model, and I got slightly different angles from the United States and the UK, so I was kind of able to put them together, and I got. People really think, oh, she's a champion of the social model, and I'm not, because if you read my thesis, you'll find that I'd really had enough of it. I thought it was practically creationist. I actually wrote that in its dismissal of biology. So I wanted to see the best of the social model. Yes, let's look at how society creates disability and how it, the barriers, etc., etc. But let's work together. And I do think most people are heading that way. So you're moving towards, well, as you say, you always knew about the social determinants of illness and health, which is really another way of talking about intersectionality, isn't it? It's the same. They're the same
Mm,
categories. So, and I think we are this. It's kind of like a dialectical process. That these oppositions are kind of converging, and there's a new synthesis. So I'm certainly not a social model fundamentalist, but neither are the people that I followed 25 years ago. They've also moved on to a more
mm,
realistic hybrid sort of view.
mm,
So, and that I think, and that percolates.
mm, mm. Because I guess in a way, that's kind of, it's that whole concept of no one way is necessarily the right way. And, that there may be benefits to conceptualizing things in both ways, either ways, or some kind of hybrid between them. And ultimately, if you think about it, it's probably there may well be along the neurodiversity continuum, there may well be some individuals who, by virtue of their difference, actually also have impaired, and there may be limits to what society or institution or education can do to support them. So that in those cases, a medical model may be appropriate and may be wished for by either the individual or their parents. And I guess
Hmm.
sometimes you see a little bit of tension, when you read things online or, I don't do Twitter, but I'm aware that, there's always going to be tensions between people, having very firm views one way or the other and not respecting everybody's contribution to a discussion.
Well, that's part of social change, isn't it? It's that sort of dialectical
Mm,
process of opposites clashing and new synthesis, and it's just an ongoing thing. Yeah, Twitter can be pretty horrible. But that's the voice of the people who might not have other outlets for their voices, and they're creating change as well.
What do you think that we as clinicians can do to support and, I know you're going to say join and discuss, but, to try and, have the neurodiversity movement successful or lead to the change, that is so needed?
Well, I can't really say more than what I actually believe. Like, I believe, don't pretend to be expert at things that you're not. And I mean, I have no idea what you should do. That would be what you're going to work out, and how it will evolve. I mean, when I'm thinking from my point of view, you're probably thinking about things like budgets and staffing and how can I allocate my money and who do I hire. I mean, that is something that I have no experience of. I can't. I'm sorry if that's, but people don't. I forgot what I was going to say. I was going to close on this moment, on this quotation, which I hope I wrote it down. I didn't, but anyway, I mean, it's just that old Talmudic saying of you don't have to finish the task, but you're not free to desist from doing your bit. It's like you have to give it a go. What more can you do? And keep learning. Oh, and read my book. Yeah, sorry.
Judy, I'm doing a bad job at multitasking because I see there's a couple of questions in, but of course, when you're trying to have a conversation and be part of it and listen, it's very hard to keep an eye on questions. But I wonder, could I pose one question to you and see whether you might like to comment? The question is by an anonymous attendee: would you consider excluding adult neurodivergent voices in this type of dialogue as punitive? I belong in both the advocacy community as well as the academic community. Each section is an echo chamber. Professionals don't hear the neurodivergent voice, and the neurodivergent voices don't hear the professional voices. And how can one create the bridge?
Well, I guess you have to have consultative committees and invite people, or unless they refuse to come, would they? I don't know. Most people, if an organisation invites them, feel very proud to go along and give their voice. That excluding.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's an echo. I don't know.
I guess
How to invite.
I guess yeah, you cannot have a movement or a discussion if you exclude, one part of the discussion. So it's absolutely essential to have both parties there, and to be respectful, I would imagine, to both parties' views. And we are very aware, Judy, you and I have mentioned this before in December, language is so important. And I know even Simon Baron-Cohen, when he gave his presentation, discussed the importance of language and how it's changing. I mean, even identity first, person first language, I'm not clear what it is I should be following that isn't going to, offend somebody. I don't know if you have a view on that,
I do,
from the neurodiversity.
because yesterday, I decided, or maybe Monday, I decided that I'm going to go off Twitter because I've got to focus on myself. But then I had withdrawal symptoms and I went looking for trouble. And then I had a go at people about identity first language, and I got into a mountain of trouble. Or maybe it was on LinkedIn. It was on LinkedIn. And I just took, Identity first language, I think I was talking about what I was saying about it is that why do people cling to these incredibly limited identities when we humans are so complex? And, there are many good reasons for that because when you find out you're autistic, you join an autistic support group and, you get that solidarity and identity. But the thing is, all these conditions overlap, ADHD, autism, spectrum, rather, they all overlap. I've got three of them, which I discovered later. I never wanted to, when I wrote my thesis, sometimes I would call myself autistic because the language is so difficult. But I also said in my thesis that I don't identify as autistic, but as a person with with many autistic traits, dyspraxic traits, and so on. Why do people reduce themselves to this? Partly, I think it's because of the welfare system that requires you to cling to a label. And if people now with autism say, "Well, I'm neurodiverse," oh, good, we can shut you. You don't have to we don't have to give you benefits anymore. So that's probably one of the reasons. Um, you know, we we have a label-based welfare system, not a needs-based welfare system. And as you raise the question, well, how complex can a needs-based system become? That's something that's gonna, there's generally a feeling that we need to evolve in the direction of a needs-based social security system. I don't like the word welfare, actually. I prefer social security. We all need insurance. Um, and yeah, that's
So I guess even the words that you're saying there, I mean, you're so right. Social security is a much nicer word, kinder, more inclusive word without a stigma or prejudice. But it's almost like there needs to be, kind of a reminder to people about, think about how you say things and what you say, and to be offered opportunities to consider appropriate or alternative words that still cover the same thing. And you and I
mm,
spoke about this yesterday, Judy, that, you know, most people do not deliberately set out to offend. And if they use incorrect language, it's because they haven't been aware. And, usually gently reminding somebody or helping them see, how they might say something differently, has been most successful. Um, May I just put another question to you from Hugh Locke or maybe Luke, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Hugh, but it sounds wonderful in that he's ADHD and has established a neurodisability diversity working group at work supported by their HR team. And Hugh is trying to make the workplace more humane for neurodiversity, as well as help the organization to recruit and get the best from talented ND staff. And Hugh, I assumed practicing correctly neurodiversity, maybe, I hope that's what you mean by ND. One thing we've noticed is that people sometimes think that neurodivergence is a single thing and that we all have the same characteristics and preferences and need the same type of environment. And Judy, this is a little bit about what you were saying, why people cling on to their identity because they are so different. I mean, I forget who said it, but when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person or one person with autism. And Hugh is wondering, the glossy brochure Judy mentioned plays into this. Seems to me that one thing we have in common is that our behavior is often interpreted, or might I say misinterpreted, as emotional responses rather than cognitively driven. And Hugh asked, do you have any thoughts on what else could be emphasizing this common agenda or perhaps common clustering of everybody into the same mold in the workplace?
So he's asking, I can see the question here. Do you have what else we could be emphasizing as a common agenda in work? Well, the thing is that if you put neurodiversity services and whatnot in, there's just a million companies that are now spruiking their ability to tailor programs to individuals. Um, yeah, I I know that a lot of the big corporations are doing it, and like I said, they're hiring autistic people mostly. Um, we just need to keep pushing the idea of all the different varieties of people and roles. Corporations are not really thinking about roles. They're not thinking about that people might like to work in libraries. They don't all want to work in IT. They might want to be a lot of autistic women are writers rather than speakers. I'm not sure if I'm answering his question though, but
Mm.
there's a lot more work needs to
I
be,
guess.
and that's why all these companies are springing up. And whether, some of them, who knows if they're cowboys or what they are, but some of them will be doing a really good job.
Mm.
And there's occupational therapists and physiotherapists and every kind of specialty. So
I,
just to
I
research,
guess in some ways.
sell them to your organisation. Someone
Pardon,
reputable.
Judy, could you just repeat that?
Yeah, I was just saying, well, if you're in an organisation, do some research on the internet, look at local agencies that seem reputable, talk to them, see if they'll do an in-house workshop. I often complain about the commercialization of all this, but in some ways it's a good thing. It's a double-edged sword. These people are there
Mm.
to help and start you on your company or your organisation on the right path.
Well, it's likely that commercialization will certainly continue to drive things because people are often and maybe always rewarded by money. But it's about developing a society that's much more inclusive and, a society, when money is generated, that actually policies are and planning are there to make sure that all members of society are benefiting by, the additional wealth because we have become hugely wealthy and successful. Do you think COVID is going to bring benefits to neurodiversity? I mean, you hear a lot of people talking about the benefits at an individual level by choice, being able perhaps to work from home or not. But then that's a small number. There's some people who've no choice, they're out of work. It's not a choice to work at home. But do you think for the neurodiversity movement, COVID might bring some silver lining?
Well, they do say so. Certainly for us and my daughter, who doesn't really particularly care for society, it's been really good. It hasn't been a hardship, but again, you've got to have the resources. You've got to have you've got to have space to work from. You've got to have equipment to work with. Um, and remote working is going to be unpleasant for just as many people as it's pleasant for. Hopefully, there will be more of a hybrid in the future. I find working. I mean, I work
I
from home
suppose
difficult because it's isolating, and you've got to do all the roles rather than some of the roles.
I suppose, Judy, what it has done is maybe just at least um, shake that idea that work was always driving your long commute into work, sitting at work and doing it. So the one good thing COVID has done is it's made people reflect on choices and areas that they do have some control over. And obviously, if you have neurodiversity reasons that make you think you'd like things to be a little bit different, maybe now is the idea if you're lucky enough to have that choice. But it maybe perhaps allow, the neurodiversity movement to continue to highlight the fact that we shouldn't assume working conditions should remain as they are. We should constantly be looking to see can they be changed to suit different people's needs differently. Judy, I'm just going to end with one last, because we are running out of time, with one last question and comment. And I know we spoke about this yesterday, so I know your answer will be received positively by Katrina Nichols. And Katrina has said rightly, because this is what I experienced as well in my reading around the neurodiversity movement and listening to different YouTubes. There seems to be a divide in the autism community. There are those that promote neurodiversity, but there's another group of parents with autistic children whose experience of autism is negative. The neurodiversity movement has to include all voices, all perspectives, and not exclude anyone or dismiss those who are having a difficult time. Identity politics can be exclusionary. All experiences are valid and should be recognized. And Judy, I know you hold this view, completely, because it was so apparent yesterday, but would you like to end by commenting perhaps on that?
I'm not sure what I oppose, but what I think is about identity politics is that it's kind of the baby steps of a political movement. I mean, where you want to withdraw, it's usually the younger generation who want to rebel against the older generation. There's all those things. So, that they can take some very extreme fundamentalist views, but most people. I mean, I was into identity politics 20 years ago. I was absorbed by it because we were just beginning. I think we talked yesterday about how it's sort of taboo to talk about low function. What is it? Mild, moderate, and severe. And instead we now have level 1, level 2, level 3, which is just kind of euphemism for the same thing anyway, I think. And I know that people who are looking after people with children or young adults or adults with severe autism or the correct terminology now is high support needs and low support needs. That's what they're talking about now, which is a nicer way of talking about it, I guess. But they feel very pushed out by all the noise that's being made by the identity politics, and they're resentful. My work, I think I told you yesterday, was based on Asperger's syndrome, and researching online participant observation of some of those groups, and they were all very, very articulate. And I made sure to say, that's all I'm talking about. I don't know anything about classical autism. I haven't experienced it. I've seen it in the some of it in the and that would not even be severe autism. That would be moderate autism in the teen groups that we started. Unfortunately, if you take the view that how should I say this, that that high support needs autism, actually I just got into trouble about this. Was the second thing I got into trouble on Twitter about, which was that there's a thing about autism moms, they're called, or martyr moms, and much reviled by the more identity politics types. And what was I going to say? That's what I was going to say is, then who are you going to blame if there's something, if the child is not coping, or if the parent says I can't cope, or well, you're going to blame the mother, and there's always got to be somebody to blame. So I think it's a totally very unsatisfactory thing that happens. But it happened in the disability rights movement in the 90s. It happened with the women's. It happens with every youth movement. You just got to keep going, I think. And
Judy,
I sympathise with both sides. I sympathise with the people who are now young adults who got no understanding because their parents weren't well educated or didn't know what to do, and they're angry and resentful at the moment. And at the same time, parents are still having a hard time. And there is more work for me. It's about a low, moderate, severe. To me, is about, I guess that's what you're asking in a way, is about, well, how much caring time does that person need, and who does that caring? And usually it's the mothers, and then they get called autism mothers. And I have a mildly autistic child, and it still requires a lot of work. When I say child, young adult.
Mm. Judy, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time for our conversation today. And I think, you know, your insightful and balanced and compassionate answer there at the end, you know, really is, I suppose, what you would hope the neurodiversity movement that you were instrumental in setting up, both by your professional position and your personal role as a parent and daughter, you know, I certainly am very excited, you know, to be just in our own small way in UCD to try and see whether our university can be, you know, a little bit more understanding of different ways of learning and thinking, and seeing, just trying to make sure that at that very small level to begin with, that we can create some kind of change. And obviously, you know, it's so educational to be able to have master classes where we're bringing together people who are very much more expert and knowledgeable in this area, you know, to help everybody have a conversation and to change any, you know, rigid stereotypical views people have had on how to do things or whose experience is most valid. I mean, everybody's experience, even if it's only N of one, is a valid one. And it's about working together, you know, for a better society. And that includes all of us. We're all in that society. So Judy, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I would like to welcome the audience back to the next masterclass, which is in a month's time. If Beth wouldn't mind putting the slide up, just so that I can give you the date. It's by Professor Lawrence Fung from Stanford University. So the time to accommodate north, south, east, west, the west side of the world will be 5 o'clock our time. And Lawrence is probably going to talk, along with other things, about you know, the advocacy work that he has done in Stanford University, making sure that an Ivy League college, you know, is able to embrace this movement. And Judy, thank you so much for many, many years. I hope that the movement is moving in the direction that you're happy with.